Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Secure the Seat Live. My name is Minda Hartz, and I'm so happy that you're here with us today. If you're rocking with us for the first time, welcome. You're already part of the squad. If you show up on Mondays, you already know the vibe. You're part of the family, you're part of the squad. Thank you so much for how you show up each Monday, or even if you miss a live episode, you go back and you watch the replay, and we'd love to hear your comments. Don't forget, if you missed anything, you can go to our YouTube page, Secure the Seat Live, and you can catch all of almost a year's worth of live broadcasts here on LinkedIn. So even if you missed something, you can always go back, and those gems tend to hit differently depending on where you are in your career or where you are in life. And then also, just want to say thank you to each of you who've purchased, supported, left a review on Amazon or Goodreads for Right Within. It means so much to me. I just want to say thank you. This book is really important to me because healing is important for all of us. It's the way we can just live a better life, right? With us at the center. And so I just want to say thank you. And if you haven't had an opportunity, you can go ahead and purchase Right Within wherever you like to buy your books. I even read my own Audible, so I invite you to listen if you're not tired of hearing me talk. But it's almost like sitting in my living room where we're just chopping it up and having a conversation about our past and current workplace experiences. So just excited. Oh, and also too, we're going to drop in the link. I have one more virtual tour date. I've been on virtual book tour for the last 2 weeks. Tomorrow is the last day. So if you haven't been able to join us, tomorrow is a good opportunity to do that, because I am having a great conversation with my Canadian sister, Carlin Purcell. If you know her work, then you already know we're going to get into it. She talks a lot about healing and trauma as well. And so it's just going to be a great conversation. So again, happy that you're here. So we're going to have a great conversation today with my friend Jerry Wan. We're going to just talk about a lot of things, but I know that there has been a lot of discussion amongst, people in the Black community and my community, and the allyship or lack of allyship of the AAPI community. So we're just going to talk about why we need each other, because I believe that success is not a solo sport. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with Jerry, and I just want to give a shout out to Garland Fuller, who brought us together. And so now Jerry's stuck with me, but we're just going to chat. So ping somebody to join in on the conversation, because I believe this is an important conversation. Jerry is a storyteller, a keynote presenter. He is a founder, an entrepreneur, and just overall a really great guy. So I'm going to bring Jerry to the stage. What's up, Jerry?
Hi. Thank you for the warm introduction. And yes, shout out to Garland. Hope you're watching. I know you watch these. You've been on here, which I was playing opposite producer on the back end. So how are you doing? It's been what, 10 days?
Yes. It's been wild, but I'm actually happy that it's a different feel, like, to be on virtual book tour as opposed to in person. But I have had some in-person things, so it's been nice to also meet folks. But I'm so excited to talk about this, because I know you're going to keep it real with us, Jerry. But for those who may not know about your work, tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so in short, very similar to you, I got sick of working in corporate America for a variety of reasons. One of them being racism, and realizing that it was not a place built for me. And I know many in the Black community, many in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Um, I think, and no fault or no shame if you have broken through and you've achieved what you want to achieve. But it became very evident to me that I was giving up way too much. Not just what people think about, family time, opportunities, but it was just my authenticity, the fact that I can be me, and constantly feeling. And we talk about code switching, and having a white voice and having a different voice at home and all these things. But having to consistently think about, holy crap, I got to do this for 30 more years, and I don't like having two versions of myself. And it became very, very apparent for me a couple years ago when I became a father of two. Not only being able to provide for my kids financially, but what do I want them to see and emulate growing up? And if I'm not walking the walk, or if I'm just talking the talk and not walking the walk in terms of that. And so now what I do, I speak for a living. I speak at companies, I speak at schools, organizations about diversity, about innovation, about storytelling from an Asian Pacific or Asian American lens. We have a number of podcasts that we produce internally. We do some production for other people. And so, I talk for a living, in short, but I get to talk about the things that matter to me. And I get to talk about the things, as you do, that we didn't hear growing up. And I hope, it is my wish, that we inspire the next generation so that when you write books like this and when I have podcasts like mine, people don't talk about it from the perspective of, wow, that's groundbreaking. Wow, that's so rare. Our goal is to be normal when we come when it comes to talking about race in the workplace and our own experiences. So yeah, that's it's funny. I don't know if my parents would have ever imagined that their immigrant kid would end up making a living talking about our experience, because that's also not in their universe. But here I am.
Well, I'm glad that you leaned into it. And, it's funny, Jerry, over the weekend on Saturday, I was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award at my high school, which was really surreal, right? Because every other day I probably was like, couldn't wait to get out of high school, right? Just wanted to get out of here. And I don't know if my parents had them. I mean, I knew they probably knew I would do something great, in life, but I don't know if they knew that I would end up using my voice in the ways that I am, it just feels so good to use our voices to help other people, because I do believe our voices are tied to someone else's freedom at times if we use that. And so I'm just so glad that you're using your voice as well. But I use the term AAPI. Why don't we start with this? Tell people who aren't familiar with what that is, and how you feel about it, because it reminds me of, like, people ask me, well, how do you feel about BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color? And I don't like using BIPOC, but I don't like shame anybody who else. I like to say it out if I'm going to use it. But I'm just curious, kind of like, how you feel about AAPI.
So I'll start with the origin and sort of the technical how it all came about. So the way that we celebrate APAM, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and there's probably about like 7 like politically correct ways to describe our community, if you will. And I genuinely believe that it is well intentioned in the perspective of inclusivity, to try to make not everybody feel left out. The origins of the term actually came about in the couple decades ago, where they wanted to advocate for celebrating our heritage. So it actually started as a week in May, and it was then the Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Week. It was a week in May, and it was actually picked in May to honor 2 things: the completion of the Continental Railroad, which Chinese Americans had a significant contribution to in building America, and 2, celebrating the very first Japanese American immigration to this country. And then eventually it was a month, and it wasn't even a federally, a nationally recognized federal ongoing Heritage Month. That had to be done just about 20 years ago. But I, for reasons unbeknownst to me, they bundled everything west of California, right? So it's like, hey, if you're west of California, because Hawaiians are technically Pacific Islanders, and that's a whole different topic of U.S. history that we didn't learn the correct version of. But the way that I feel about it is, I am a Korean American immigrant. I came here when I was 8. I barely understand the diverse experiences of other Asian Americans, whether they be refugees or adoptees, or even from smaller countries, particularly of West Asia and Central Asia. And so I understand that to be inclusive, AAPI, APAM, we use those monikers to describe all of it. And I don't really have a problem with people or companies or organizations that use the AAPI blanket, but be genuine in how you represent yourself and the community. If you dare to say, I am a AAPI speaker. I don't, because the Pacific Islander portion, the folks from Guam, the folks from the Northern Mariana Islands, I don't know their story. Because look, here's a key difference. My family came to America in 1992. For a lot of our Pacific Islander friends, America came to them one day and said, guess what? You're now ours. And so that colonialism, that sort of taking over of one's culture, really, for, again, if you study US history mainly for defense purposes, like, it's a very different experience. And so I don't care if you use it. I think it's fine, but my hope, my wish separate it. My big, we're going to talk about disaggregation of data later. Like, separate it all, right? And celebrate the people for what they are. I think it's a little lazy to say like like Asians are 4 out of 7 people in the world, and we get 1 month. That's not possible either. And most organizations do a terrible job celebrating it. But anyway, so that's sort of the PI. Fun fact: some some people think that PI actually stood for Philippine Islands, which again, they're actually in between of what would be traditionally considered the Asian continental area versus Pacific Islands. So anyway, that's the key difference there.
I love that. Jerry's giving us a little history lesson today, so I hope you're pulling up real close to the computer screen so we can get ourselves together. But I appreciate you using that, and I think too having that space and grace, because I think when we use it or people use it, it's well intentioned, but also understanding that there's a wide array of experiences. Just like when we say people of color, not everybody's experiencing it the same. But you touched a little bit about it. I think origin stories are so important, Jerry. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience, when you came in 92 to the United States, and then were there times where you felt isolated being here? Because, Black people aren't the only ones that experience discrimination in the United States.
My American origin story is fascinating because we moved to a suburb in LA called Fullerton, which statistically is the most Korean place outside of Korea. And so, obviously it made sense. I had family there. So my parents, sort of that community-based migration patterns that we always understand. And so, my school district would send out like letters in English and Korean, even in elementary school. So like, the ability or I guess the urgency for my parents to quote unquote assimilate and try to fit in wasn't there as strongly as it is or was for so many of my friends. And so this American identity or this Korean American identity was pretty healthy, because, I found friends who spoke Korean to me the first day I showed up to class. And so I never really felt isolated, where I think that also sort of was unfortunate was that it was very, there's a lot of Koreans, a lot of other Asian folks, but we didn't see a lot of other Black folks or brown folks, even though different parts of Fullerton are pretty diverse. We moved to America in January of 92, and then 3 months later, the LA riots happened. And so my introduction to what Black people were and what they represented and the way that I was supposed to feel about them, mainly from the dinner talk or the chatter from my parents and their friends and their church friends and people who had businesses in, South LA and Koreatown, that I feel most unfortunate about. That I didn't, obviously, being immigrant parents, my parents are not at fault either. They were just a product of the system of the news and community news cycle that fed this information to them. But that was sort of very important in understanding how it all happened. Then I moved to New York City, which is everybody's everybody, and there's no majority. The high school I went to was what was one where you had to test into, so we were the majority again. There were more Asian kids than anything else. But I think all of that, and there are probably countless stories I can tell you about feeling isolated, feeling othered. I remember in the 4th grade, my parents sent us to a summer school in the district, but not a part of Fullerton that was very Korean. And so I showed up to the school. I'm playing with some new friends. They were Hispanic, and they, one friend was talking about me to his friend, saying, "Hey, meet my new Chinese friend." And I was like, "Hey, I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean." And he goes, "What's that?" And I tried to explain to him. He goes, "That doesn't matter." And I was like, even at that early age, you're like, you don't even know what my country is. And so, that's been there. And I think, as even as a very privileged, educated East Asian man, when we get to higher education, when we get to corporate America, either they expect us to fully assimilate, because so many of us have done so. And I think the expectation is that we work hard, that they can keep us, quiet, and we don't, I don't know. I think there's this expectation. And again, I might get some DM saying I wasn't, and I'm not talking about you anecdotally. I'm talking about us as a community statistically, that we don't um, statistically, we represent very well at the bottom and maybe the middle part of your organization. But do you see people like me at the top? And do you even see people like me at the top at institutions where we got our degrees from? No, not yet. And so, those are some of the things that I think was very apparent to me. And I think the easy thing, the easy answer for, especially for immigrants who are trained to assimilate, is if you don't see yourself at the top, try to be one, right? So our entire life has been study hard, go to the good schools, get the good jobs, keep your head down, and maybe they'll reward you with the promotion. I think, two thoughts that have been really, really clear to me since the earlier part of my life, I think is to ask yourself, do you even want to be at the top of those organizations? And two, what would you have to sacrifice in order to get there? And what are you going to do about it for other people? And so I obviously had those conversations with myself and decided to get out of the system completely for now. Never say never. And try to, impact the organizations, the same organizations, but from a different method, which is to speak and to get to sort of in the theme of how our economy has evolved into a direct to consumer model. I want to take my thoughts direct to the consumer too, in on platforms like this, where we don't need the filter of an employer or a school to, filter our messages.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughtfulness on how you think about it, and how, again, this is Jerry's experience, right? He's not saying that we're not lumping everybody into, one bucket, but I think understanding the individuality that we all do bring to the table. And in the last year, Jerry, I would be insensitive not to bring it up in this platform, is that, oh, and before I go into this next one, we're about to jump in the deep end of the swimming pool in a second. But if you have questions, I know people are watching across platforms here, so pop some questions in. I know you're probably just enjoying such a great conversation, because we don't always get to have some of these together. But I know that over the last year, there's been some tensions between, Black community, and I'll use the term AAPI community. With, there's been some rioting, there's been some, well, you haven't shown up for me, you haven't shown up for me, that kind of conversation. Why is it important that we do build strong relationships together, and show up for each other? Curious your thoughts on that.
If we have 4 hours to talk, Minda, I think we can talk about this.
The cliff
Look,
notes, right?
ultimately, at the end of the day, the feel good answer is human to human. We have to be there for each other, right? And I think once you get to know somebody on a human to human level, again, I didn't grow up with Black friends until high school, and some of them are still very near and dear to my heart. Fully understanding what they were going through, seeing how my Black friends in business school in 2016 were dealing with the first wave of Black Lives Matter, and them physically not being able to come to class, and understanding through one-on-one conversation that they see themselves in these people being murdered, and that's impacting them. How am I going to respond, and how am I going to be there for them? Because it's not a not me problem. I think that's, and I know that people use different ways to try to build empathy, but at the end of the day, when we peel away all of our layers, the ones that we're born with and the ones that we adopt, we're just two human beings trying to survive. And in the grand scheme of things, we're just like specks in the universe. So, like, why not just be nice to each other? There's that's the holistic answer. The sort of the tactical answer to that is we're both victims of the same system. We are both on the same. They're trying to separate and to divide us. And I know you hear these phrases a lot, folks, like, divide and conquer. Look, if the enemy is white supremacy, not white people, I said white supremacy, and the systems and even the government and the rules and law enforcement and the court systems and how even companies are formed and all these things. If that's the common enemy, we have to put aside our differences, right? And to really think about, keep going back. And I know it's hard because we weren't taught this stuff either, right? So I'll use the LA riots as an example. So two things sparked the LA riots the way that the media likes to portray it, right? A Korean shopkeeper named Sun Ja-do shot Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old Black woman, in what she thought was a theft, but it was ended up being an orange juice bottle, right? So shot her in the back of the head, and obviously the communities were upset, understandable. Two, four LAPD officers, all white, beat the living daylights out of Rodney King back in the 90s when how to know how somebody had a handheld camcorder pointed at the situation. There was video evidence and they got away with it. Right. So the day that the verdict was read and they were acquitted, people were pissed. They started marching and they started looting and burning stuff in sight. And because systemically, LAPD decided to put their boundaries of protection not in the neighborhood of Koreatown, but rather just a little bit west. And if you're familiar with LA, you know what that means. That was the reason why there was so much economic damage in the billions of dollars to the LA area. So on its surface, it's like, okay, Korean woman killed black girl and white cops got away with killing a black man. So we're going to get, angry on both sides. And then guess what it did to people like my parents? They were scared of black people for decades because they saw what they saw. Right. But so again, we don't have the time for historical economic lessons, but why were black people in communities where they didn't have access to economic opportunity? Why were Korean people, early immigrants, able to scoop up liquor stores and dry cleaners and other sorts of retail stores in areas that were so impoverished that were being sold at discounts by white people leaving town in south parts of LA? And so again, I don't think that everybody's innocent in this matter, but you have to go back and be like, okay, what if the people had the opportunity to own their own stores in their own neighborhoods? Right? What if loans were available? What if instead of funding police, they funded community education? Right? What if this community actually lived up to the promise of taking care of its immigrants and gave Korean, Black, other immigrants coming to this country equal access and equal ample opportunity to buy stores and to build their businesses in areas where they didn't have to worry about, danger? Let's think about that. And so so the short answer is, well, that's fine, but that takes decades to fix or to whatever the problem is now. Well, we're trying to build a better, safer, more kind world for my kids and other folks' kids. And so that sort of stuff has to happen now. It was a very, very interesting time. And even though it wasn't the fire starter. It was a very pivotal day, March 16th, when the eight folks were killed in Atlanta. In the preceding 48 hours, I got a few text messages from friends. And the most impactful for me was the ones that came from my Black friends, particularly men. And it said a few things, I'll summarize. Said, hey, hope you're doing okay. I have no idea what you're going through. Absolutely none. But I need you to know that I'm here. And I also need you to know that I am willing to do what you want me to do, because I don't know what it means to be you. And they said, I don't care if you reply. I just need you to know that I'm here. Which was very similar to the same text I sent to them last summer in the shadows of George Floyd's murder. And I was just trying to be supportive, but I don't want to speak for people. I want to speak up for people. And so that's where I think the key difference is. I think having the humility and just being open-minded to say, hey, I have no idea, Minda, what it means to be a Black woman in this country. I have absolutely none. But I will use my privilege, the privilege that I have as an Asian man with perhaps, my own community's audience, or into, privilege access that I have that you may not, to say, hey, go buy her book, read from her experience. Yes, this book was written mainly for Black women, but I should read it, because if people like me don't understand your experience, we have an extremely dangerous proposition where we just want to be accepted as white men in corporate America and fall into the same people that you call out in this book and not even think about it, because we long so hard to be assimilated. And I think in our parents' well-intentioned effort for us to have economic opportunity through assimilation, I think we just sort of forgot that what we were giving up. And keep in mind that many Asian folks whose parents came here, Korean folks, like my grandparents were born into Japanese occupation in 1930s. The war happened in the 40s, and my parents were born in the 50s. All of this stuff that we talk about, that we get to talk about today, are so privileged because they were literally trying to survive. And so, we have to help them bridge that gap. And I think that's also, when we think about Black and Asian American, what the media would like for us to be, sort of butting heads, you're talking different generations. You talk to people our generation and below, dude, there's nothing. We don't, everybody's on board. But I think when you're talking about early immigrants who've never been taught American history. And even if they did, guess who wrote the textbooks? And then for them to be, dropped into America and saying like, figure it out. Anyway, so the way forward is for as many people who are victims of the systems that plague us to think about how unified we are. Look up, like, we don't Asian. I'm not here without Martin Luther King Jr. We're not here without civil rights, because the Immigration Act that allowed Asian folks to come in happened after the Civil Rights Act passed. Um, like, it's look up Grace Lee Boggs, look up like there's just so much solidarity, but that's not what they don't want us to learn any of that. They want us to separate. And so yeah, I'll pause there.
Harry, I have to get my tambourine out because you are preaching, preaching, preaching. And these are the conversations that I know you're having them, but I knew it was very important to bring you on so that, the audience here at Secure the Seat can also be a part of this, and also us to start thinking about, each other's experiences and understanding the kind of intergenerational divide there as well that you were talking about. And at the end of the day, I mean, we all want the pursuit of happiness, but we can pursue it together. And these are just such important conversations. I know that we can't like dig deep, but I know that you also host podcasts too. So I do want to ask that question. If people want to follow you, support you, find you, and listen and continue their educational journey, where are some good ways to do that?
I'm loud as hell right here on LinkedIn. You can, so Dear Asian Americans is one of the podcasts that we produce. We interview Asian Americans from all backgrounds to talk about their own journeys. We're working on a few different things where I really believe in the power of giving people economic empowerment. And I think those are, when we ask my friends like, hey, what did you wish you learned at home or in school growing up? It's all the things that, I don't know, we talk about, right? Financial literacy, entrepreneurialism, how to, grow wealth, because we can't. And I know there's a lot of perhaps similarities between the solidarity message and anti-capitalism, but it is what it is. We need no money, no mission. And so we need to build people. We need to help people economic empowerment engines to do whatever they want to do. Freedom doesn't come from being poor. Money actually gives you the freedom and the flexibility to do the things that you want to do. And you and I are extremely privileged to be able to do the things that we do, but there were parts where we probably could have learned a hell of a lot of lessons early on in our journey of being an entrepreneur, of being content creators and authors, that probably sped things up for a little bit. So if you want to talk about speaking and stuff, jerrywan.com is where you can go. I've been very blessed and fortunate to work with some household names and brands. And I'm really, really honored if you invite me to speak in May during Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I'd be even more blessed if you invite this Asian brother to speak not in May, because we're trying to stay busy all year long and not just in our Heritage Month.
All year long, don't we, Jerry?
I know, but we talk about this all the time. Like, Black folks are busy in February and then not anytime else. That's the stereotype. And so shout out to the people who keep us busy year round.
Praise the Lord. Yes. Thank you for those who call. Yes. And you call us in our months, but you call us in the other months, right?
Yep. I want to be busy in November.
Yes. I love that. This is just I'm seeing like all the comments coming in. People are just really appreciating your authenticity and truth telling. And that's how we get to freedom, is when we're all telling the truth, right? We're all being honest. The last thing that I want to jump into our bonus questions really quick, because I know we're almost at the end of our show, Jerry. I could talk to you all day, and we will continue this conversation. But one of the things that I'm a real big fan of is grits and rap lyrics. Now, Jerry, I know you have some Black friends, so I'm hoping that they did right by making sure you've had some grits in your life.
I have, yes.
Are you a grits eater, Jerry?
I enjoy it.
Okay.
I actually do. Yeah.
Okay, good. I have to tell my friends out in the virtual spaces that this weekend I had a really fun time, because I was back home for a little bit with my family, and I have two nephews, and they had grits for the first time. One is 2 and one is 3, and it just like warmed my heart seeing them take their first little bites of grits, and throughout the day they were telling people, I had some grits, I had some grits. It was the cutest little thing. But what is your favorite rap lyric and why, Jerry?
Um, that this was the question that I toiled over the most when you sent over the questions. Um, I gotta keep in theme, and one, I gotta uh rep the West because that's where I am from. So we're gonna go to Tupac, and we're gonna go to perhaps not his most favorite or his most popular song, but my favorite, which is Changes. And so there's part of the song that says, we got to make a change. It's time for us as a people to start making some changes. Let's change the way we eat. Let's change the way we live. And let's change the way that we treat each other. You see, the old way wasn't working. So it's on us to what we got to do to survive. And if you listen to the rest of the lyrics, and I'm sure people, might be humming along with it in their head now, this was 20 years ago and not much has changed in terms of, murdering Black people and getting away with it and just, the infighting that happens. And I know perhaps again with a lot of his content, it wasn't necessarily directed at the Korean dude, but I also think about what we need to learn and the way, think about, I don't know, like we can call him, maybe he was a genius, but, even just the way that we live and eat, that has a lot to do with economic empowerment. It has a lot to do with the way that we're seeing changes now.
Yeah.
I mean, eating a vegan lifestyle is more popular in the Black male community than any other demographic. We don't talk about it. Why? Because we're literally trying to live. Because the way the information and the foods that were fed to us were wrong. But even just the mindset change of forward thinking and leaving a better legacy to our kids and our community. And this line is, the old way wasn't working, so it's on us to do what we got to do to survive. Same stuff every day, same stuff, new day isn't going to work. And so looking at it from a pathway forward, we have to work with each other, which wasn't an option or which wasn't a thing. And so the big difference between 1992 and now is that thanks to the internet, we can talk to each other without the media filtering their BS. And so if you look at the conversations on social, if you look at this meeting and this event here, we have to use each other's platforms and privileges to amp each other up. Like, people don't know, we haven't met in person yet, and at the very latest, we're going to be hanging out in Austin together next March, because you're speaking at South by Southwest and I get to speak at South by Southwest. And even that, like, your panel's super diverse too. And I think that's sort of, we can't, even though we focus on elevating our own communities because we have to, we get to bring other people along. And this is not just an Asian American conversation, not just a Black conversation. And so that's it. Yeah. And I listened to a lot of songs over the weekend trying to figure out what the heck do I.
That was the perfect one, Jerry. That was the perfect one. I know, like you said, that may not be like, when you think of Tupac, people may not put that one, but when you like sit back and really think about his brilliance, his genius, he was really I mean, there's so many. That's like we need to have a whole nother session about like dissecting Pac's like lyrical prowess on some of the things that he was talking about back then that are still showing up today. He was like Notre Dame or something.
Yeah. Well, reading your book, you just drop like lyrical gems and pop culture references, and yeah.
I love that though. And everybody watching, I believe, has the capacity to be a leader. You don't have to wait for your boss to give you that badge or ask you to be one. We can all activate our leadership. And this is basically what we're saying. You said something that I really loved. You said you're not speaking for people, you're speaking up, right? And I love that so much, because we can all show up and speak up. So what's one tip you would give everybody to leave the workplace better than we found it?
I think I'll go back to humanity. I think just get to know people. And I know that means different things now that we're virtual, we're a hybrid, we're whatever. I think it's really important, as we believe, to find communities of like-minded people for us to find support and to find community. And we believe, or I believe, in the strong power and necessity of ERGs and investment in our own communities. But none of that stuff is going to work unless we build one-to-one relationships with people who don't look like us, right? Because I think our first, sort of layer is judgment based on stereotypes that we were taught. And so how do you unlearn it? You get to know people, and you'd be shocked. whether they're similar to you or whether you learn something. Um, as much as we live in a field with data, we live in a world that is analytically driven. But at the end of the day, whether it's work or whether it's friendship, it's two human beings trying to figure this world out. And so I would encourage people to reach out to somebody who shares and maybe doesn't share your similar backgrounds. Again, I understand how hard it is virtually, but perhaps it's easier. Just have one of these virtual meetings. It's just me and Minda talking. We just happen to broadcasting it out to the world. But imagine if we did this instead of, just hanging out with the people that look like us all the time. And both are important. So I'm advocating for both. Invite people to new experiences culturally that, might be new to them. Again, inviting people to dinner or food is a little bit difficult now, but try to understand where there are similarities, because that's where the real magic is. And, recognize that, you're here to make friends for the lifelong marathon. And so, I think that's just the human relationship building, and you never know where it's going to go. The way that Minda and I became friends, we could have never predicted. But here we are, and we don't know what we're going to do in the future together. So, just be a kind human being, and extend that kindness to somebody else, and get ready for magic to happen.
Yes, I love it all, and I'm a better human, Jerry, for knowing you, and so thank you for how you show up in the world. And I know that people are just I'm watching all the platforms across, and they're just loving today's conversation. So rich. Follow Jerry. He's talking about these important humanitarian issues across his platform. So don't let it stop here on Secure the Seat. Let's keep this going. Let's show up for each other. Because there is beauty in the diversity, right? And so I'm appreciative to the work you do. Listen, Jerry, any final thoughts as people go into the week? You've dropped a lot of gems on us, so I hate to even ask you that because, but the one thing I would tell everybody is to share this episode. When we end on LinkedIn, the replay will post on YouTube, Secure the Seat, share it with somebody because this is the way we also create more space by sharing these types of conversations with folks.
Also, the LinkedIn algorithm isn't that friendly sometimes. Two things I want to share. Go buy this book. And I've shared this with you and the audiences before, Minda, but I would buy an extra copy for somebody who's not the target demographic of this book. It really, buy one for your HR director who's not a Black woman and see how they respond, right? Share it with somebody, because again, we can't, and the title of the book is Right Within, we can't all be right unless everybody's right. And I think we can't leave folks behind, and we need to really understand the things that we're going through. Number two, I really need everybody to cheer for the Dodgers so that we win a game at least. Very sad today. We're down 0-2. We have 3 games at home, and so I got my Dodger flag on the other side. My LinkedIn poll says that people want the Dodgers to win, and so half jokingly, and I'm really excited for this. We got to take my dad to a game. Hopefully, if there's a game 5, and so enjoy the rest of your week, folks. Thank you for attending today. And buy her book, share it with a friend, leave those reviews. That's how the game is played. And if you're able to, join us in Austin, Texas in March of next year for South by Southwest, where Minda's going to be teaching some gems about writing a book for the first time, particularly from the perspective of a woman of color. So thank you so much. And thank you to Lou and to Mike behind the scenes for making this wonderful magic happen today.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. I love showing up with each of you every Monday. We'll be here next Monday at noon. Thank you again for all that you do. I pray that you have a great week. Let's show up for ourselves, right? I know a lot of people say they hate Mondays, but let's reframe it, if I can get it out, and say that this is just the kicking off of a really great week. Let's manifest it. And Jerry, always a pleasure. We'll see you all next week. Keep securing your seat.